The bell above the door chimed, a tinny, cheerful sound completely at odds with the woman who stepped inside. She paused, her heels clicking once on the concrete floor before she seemed to think better of it, her weight shifting as if testing the sawdust-covered ground for stability. She wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my last 3 months of rent, tailored so precisely it looked less like fabric and more like a second skin sculpted from ambition and steel. Her hair was pulled back in a severe knot that left no room for frivolity, and her eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over my workshop with a detached, analytical coolness. It was the kind of look that assessed, catalogued, and dismissed all in a single, efficient motion. I knew who she was, of course. Genevieve Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, the corporate behemoth that was slowly swallowing downtown. Her face was a regular feature in the business section of the paper, always attached to headlines about mergers and record profits. More than that, she was the woman my brother, David, had dated for 2 years. The woman he had bragged about, paraded like a trophy, and then unceremoniously discarded in a way that had been both cruel and, for him, entirely predictable. I had never met her, but I felt like I knew the polished, public version of her intimately, a phantom built from David's arrogant anecdotes. She did not belong here, not in my world of wood shavings and the lingering scent of tongue oil. My workshop was my sanctuary, a place of quiet creation where the only deadlines were my own, and the only voices were the hum of the lathe and the rasp of the hand plane. It was a small, dusty pocket of the analog world, and she was an emissary from the sleek digital empire of glass and chrome. "Are you Liam Caldwell?" she asked. Her voice was exactly as I would have imagined it, crisp, clear, and without a trace of warmth. It was a voice designed for boardrooms, not for a cluttered space where a half-finished rocking chair sat waiting for my attention. I wiped my hands on a rag, the grease and wood stain leaving a familiar pattern on the worn cotton. "I am." My own voice sounded rough in comparison, coated with the fine dust that hung in the air. "If you're looking for David, he doesn't come around here." It was a preemptive strike, a way of drawing a line in the sand. I was not my brother. We shared a last name, but that was where the similarities ended. A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe pain, crossed her features before being suppressed. "I'm not looking for your brother," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm looking for you." That was a sentence I had not expected to hear. People sought me out for custom furniture, for repairs, for the skill in my hands. They did not seek me out for whatever reason a woman like Genevieve Sterling would have. My mind raced through the possibilities. Had David used my name for something? A loan? A lie? It wouldn't have been the first time. A familiar weight settled in my stomach, the one that always appeared when my brother's world threatened to bleed into mine. I leaned back against my workbench, crossing my arms. It was a defensive posture, and I knew it. "What can I do for you, Miss Sterling?" She took a careful step forward, her sharp eyes scanning the tools hanging on the pegboard wall behind me, as if they were data points on a spreadsheet. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Caldwell." I almost laughed. A proposition. It sounded so formal, so clinical. "I'm a carpenter," I said. "I make tables, chairs, cabinets. If your proposition involves wood, I'm your man. Otherwise, I think you might have the wrong address." "My proposition is of a more personal nature," she continued, undeterred. She finally met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw past the icy corporate armor. I saw exhaustion. It was there in the faint shadows under her eyes, in the subtle tension around her mouth. The impeccably dressed CEO looked fragile, like a porcelain doll holding itself together with sheer force of will. I need a fiancé. The words hung in the dusty air between us, so absurd, so out of place that my brain refused to process them for a long moment. The hum of the dehumidifier in the corner suddenly seemed deafening. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for the part where she would admit this was some kind of elaborate prank orchestrated by David. But her expression remained deathly serious. You need a what? A fiancé, she repeated, her voice unwavering. A temporary one, for 6 months. I need someone to stand by my side at company events, to meet my family, to present a stable, committed front to my board of directors. I shook my head, a slow, disbelieving motion. And you came to me? A complete stranger? Why? Because you are not a stranger, she said, and the logic was so twisted it almost made sense. I know who you are. More importantly, I know who you are not. You are not an investment banker looking to leverage our association. You are not a social climber trying to get your name in the papers. And you are not your brother. That last part landed with the force of a physical blow. Of course, it all came back to David. He was the ghost in the room, the reason for this bizarre, desperate offer. He was trying to wrestle control of the company from her. I'd heard whispers of it. After their breakup, he had positioned himself as her rival, using his position on the board, a position her own father had given him when they were together, to undermine her at every turn. His latest angle, according to the gossip mill, was that she was emotionally unstable after their split, too volatile to lead. A stable, loving fiancé would be the perfect countermove. It was a chess game, and she was looking for a pawn. A bitter taste filled my mouth. So you want to use me to get back at my brother? I want to save the company my grandfather built, she corrected, her voice sharp as glass. Your brother is an obstacle, an impediment. This is not about revenge, Mr. Caldwell. This is about survival. I need someone predictable, someone solid, someone who will not try to take advantage of the situation. From everything I have learned about you, you are a man of integrity. You work with your hands. You keep to yourself. You are, for my purposes, perfect. Perfect. I had been called many things in my life. Quiet, brooding, a little lost, but never perfect. It was a strange word to hear, especially when it was being used to describe my suitability as a prop. A quiet rage began to simmer beneath my confusion. She had learned about me? She had investigated me? This woman I had never met had compiled a file on me, reduced my life to a series of bullet points that made me a suitable candidate for this charade. No, I said, the word flat and final. Find someone else. An actor. Someone who gets paid to lie for a living. I turned my back on her, picking up a piece of sandpaper and running it over the curved arm of the rocking chair. The familiar friction was grounding, a reminder of my real life. The rasp of the paper against the wood was a sound of truth in a room suddenly filled with deception. I will pay you, she said to my back. I don't want your money. $200,000. My hand stilled. The sound of the sandpaper stopped. $200,000. The number was astronomical. It was life-changing. It was enough to buy this workshop instead of renting it, to finally get out from under the thumb of a landlord who raised the rent every 6 months like clockwork. It was security. It was freedom. It was a figure so large it felt like a fantasy. I slowly turned back to face her. The look in her eyes was not one of pity or condescension. It was the look of a strategist who had just played her winning card. She knew about my financial struggles. Of course she did. It was part of the file. The knowledge was humiliating, but the number was a powerful anesthetic. Why? I asked again. But this time the question was different. It wasn't about her motives anymore. It was about me. Why would you trust me? I'm his brother. For all you know, I could be in on it with him. Because I saw you once, she said, her voice softening for the first time. A few years ago, at a gallery opening, David was holding court, laughing, being David. You were in the corner, looking at a sculpture, not talking to anyone. You just stayed there for 20 minutes, studying it. You weren't trying to network or impress anyone. You were just there. And when David came over and tried to drag you into his circle, you shook your head and left. He told me you were his antisocial brother, the family disappointment. She took a small breath. I don't think you're a disappointment, Mr. Caldwell. I think you're the only honest man I've seen in a very long time, and I am betting everything on that honesty. Her words disarmed me completely. She had seen me, not just as David's brother, but as an individual. She had remembered a small, insignificant moment that I had long forgotten, and had drawn a conclusion from it that was startlingly accurate. She wasn't just offering me money. She was offering me a strange, skewed form of validation. She was betting on my character, the very thing my own brother so often ridiculed. The weight in my head was immense. On one side, my quiet life, my integrity, my solitude. On the other, financial freedom and the chance to, in some small way, stand against my brother's casual cruelty. And in the middle was this woman, this powerful, exhausted woman whose entire world was resting on a gamble on me. I looked around my workshop, at the tools that felt like extensions of my own hands, at the stacks of fragrant cedar and oak, at the half-finished projects that were my only real legacy. This place was everything to me, and I was about to lose it. There would be rules, I said, my voice hoarse. It wasn't an acceptance, not yet, but it wasn't a no either. A tiny, almost imperceptible wave of relief washed over her face. Of course, she said. A contract. Everything clearly defined. Discretion is paramount. I nodded slowly, my mind a maelstrom of doubt and desperate logic. I was a carpenter, a man who valued authenticity above all else, who believed that the quality of a thing was in its construction, in its honesty. And I was about to agree to become the most inauthentic thing of all, a fake fiancé, for money, and for something else, something I wasn't ready to admit. For the chance to prove that the quiet, antisocial brother was worth something after all. Okay, I breathed, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. Okay, Ms. Sterling, you've got yourself a fiancé. The first strategy session, as she called it, took place at my apartment. She had insisted, brushing aside my suggestion to meet at her office or some neutral cafe. They watch my office, she'd said, a casual statement that sent a chill down my spine. And I need to see how you live, to build the backstory. It made a grim sort of sense. Our lie needed a foundation, and my small, cluttered apartment was apparently going to be ground zero. She arrived at 7, dressed down in dark jeans and a simple black cashmere sweater. It was clearly her attempt at blending in, but the fabric had a soft, expensive sheen, and the watch on her wrist was a whisper of understated wealth. She looked less like an ice queen and more like a queen in exile surveying a peasant's hut. My apartment, which I usually found comfortable and cozy, suddenly seemed small and shabby under her gaze. The worn armchair, the stack of books on the floor, the faint smell of coffee and turpentine. It all felt like evidence of a life that was fundamentally less than hers. "Can I get you something?" I asked, gesturing vaguely towards my tiny kitchen. "Coffee? Water? I think I have some peppermint tea." "Tea would be lovely, thank you," she said, her voice softer than it had been in the workshop. She didn't sit down, but drifted towards the single large window that looked out over the rain-slicked street below. Her shoulders were slumped, not in a relaxed way, but in a way that suggested she was holding herself together by a thread. As I filled the kettle, I watched her reflection in the dark glass. The confident CEO was gone. In her place was a woman who looked profoundly tired. The weight of her world seemed to be pressing down on her, and for a moment, I felt a pang of something that had nothing to do with our contract. It was empathy, pure and simple. I brought the steaming mug to her, our fingers brushing as she took it. Her skin was cold. She wrapped her hands around the warmth of the ceramic as if it were a lifeline. We stood in silence for a long moment, watching the headlights of passing cars paint fleeting streaks of light across the walls. "We had a board meeting today," she said, her voice quiet, almost a confession. "David proposed a motion to have my leadership capabilities formally reviewed." He cited erratic behavior and emotional instability. She took a sip of tea, her eyes still fixed on the window. "He used our breakup as evidence, twisted things I told him in confidence into weapons." My jaw tightened. Typical David. He had always been a master of using intimacy as leverage, of turning vulnerability into a weakness to be exploited. He had done it to me our entire lives. Hearing that he was now doing it to her ignited a hot, protective anger in my chest. "I'm sorry," I said, and the words felt inadequate. She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. The crack in her armor wasn't just a crack anymore. It was a fissure. "The worst part is, they listened. The old guard on the board, my father's friends, they've always been skeptical of me, a woman in charge. David is just giving them the excuse they've been waiting for." She let out a shaky breath. "I'm so tired of fighting, Liam." She had used my first name. The shift from the formal Mr. Caldwell was subtle, but it felt significant. It was a step across the line that separated our business arrangement from something else. In that moment, she wasn't Genevieve Sterling, the powerful CEO hiring me for a job. She was just Jenna, a woman who was tired and hurting, seeking a moment of peace in a stranger's quiet apartment. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't a man of pretty words or grand gestures. My brother was the smooth talker, the one who always knew how to charm, how to soothe, how to manipulate. My own language was one of action, of quiet presence. So I just nodded. "I know," I said softly. And instead of offering empty platitudes or strategic advice, I did the only thing that felt natural. I gestured to the worn armchair. "Sit," I said, "just for a minute. You don't have to talk about the board or David or the contract. Just drink your tea." She hesitated for a second, as if the idea of simply stopping was a foreign concept. Then, with a sigh that seemed to release some of the tension from her body, she sank into the chair. She curled her feet up underneath her, cradling the mug of tea in both hands, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked small. She looked human. I didn't press her. I didn't ask questions. I just sat on the edge of my old wooden coffee table, the one I'd built myself years ago, and gave her the one thing I suspected she rarely received: silence. Undemanding, uncomplicated silence. We sat like that for what must have been 15 minutes, the only sounds the ticking of the clock on the wall and the gentle hiss of the radiator. She was the one who finally broke the quiet. "This chair is comfortable," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "My grandfather's," I replied. I reupholstered it last year. The springs are shot, but it has good bones. She ran a hand over the worn fabric of the armrest. Good bones, she repeated, almost to herself. My grandfather used to say that about people. Her eyes met mine over the rim of her mug, a real, unguarded look. He would have liked you. My heart did a strange, unexpected skip. It was the simplest of compliments, yet it felt more meaningful than any praise I had ever received. It was a glimpse into her world, into the values that mattered to her beneath the corporate veneer. She wasn't just seeing a tool for her plan anymore. She was seeing me. And I was seeing the woman behind the CEO mask, the one who missed her grandfather and was fighting to protect his legacy. He was the one who started it all, she continued, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. From a single machine shop, he believed in building things that last, quality, integrity. David only believes in profit margins and hostile takeovers. He wants to chop the company up and sell it for parts. He calls it maximizing shareholder value. My grandfather would call it sacrilege. Now I understood. This wasn't just about power or pride. It was about love. It was about honoring the memory of the man who had built her world. She wasn't just fighting for a title. She was fighting for a soul, the soul of her family's legacy. The anger I felt towards my brother coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. I had taken this deal for the money, to save my workshop. But sitting here, in the quiet intimacy of my living room, watching this incredibly strong woman show me her vulnerability, I realized my motivation was changing. This was no longer just a job. It was a cause. And I had, against all logic, just chosen my side. We'll make it work, I said, the words coming out with a conviction that surprised even me. The plan, our story, we'll make them believe it. She looked at me, a long, searching gaze. The exhaustion was still there, but now there was something else mixed in with it. A tiny spark of hope. Why are you doing this, Liam? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The real reason. It's not just the money, is it? I thought about my workshop, about the rent, about the freedom the money would buy. And I thought about David, about a lifetime of being made to feel second best, of watching him use and discard people without a second thought. And then I looked at her, at the genuine question in her eyes. I believe in things with good bones, I said, and I don't like watching bullies try to tear them down. A small, genuine smile finally touched her lips. It transformed her entire face, chasing away the shadows and revealing a warmth I hadn't known was there. It was a smile that reached her eyes, and it made my breath catch in my throat. Okay, Liam Caldwell, she said softly, raising her mug in a small toast. Let's give them a story to talk about. Our first few dates were exercises in awkward choreography. We were two actors learning our lines, trying to find a rhythm that felt less like a performance and more like a memory we could both plausibly share. We walked through a park on a crisp autumn afternoon, the ground a carpet of red and gold leaves. I bought her a hot chocolate from a street vendor, and she held the paper cup with a kind of detached curiosity, as if it were a strange artifact from an alien culture. So, she began, her tone all business, we need to establish a timeline. How did we meet? I kicked at a pile of leaves, the sound a dry rustle in the quiet air. I thought you had that figured out. The gallery opening. That was our first sighting, she corrected, not our first meeting. We need something more personal. Something that explains why a man like you would be interested in a woman like me. A man like me. A woman like her. The words hung there, a stark reminder of the chasm between our worlds. I was the quiet carpenter. She was the corporate titan. The idea of us together was, on its face, absurd. And that was the core of our challenge. We had to make the absurd seem inevitable. "Maybe you commissioned a piece of furniture," I suggested. "A desk for your office. You came to my workshop to discuss the design." She considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Plausible. It establishes a professional connection that could have turned personal. What kind of wood?" "What?" "The desk," she clarified. "What kind of wood would I have chosen? These are the details David will try to pick apart. He'll see it as a test." I stopped walking and looked at her. Really looked at her. I thought about the steel and glass of her public persona, but also the vulnerability I had seen in my apartment. The strength, the exhaustion, the quiet loyalty to her grandfather. "Walnut," I said, with a certainty that surprised me. "American black walnut. It's strong, durable, but it has a deep, warm, complex grain. It looks simple from a distance, but when you get up close, you see the details, the character." She stared at me, her lips slightly parted. The analytical light in her eyes softened into something else, something I couldn't quite name. It felt like being seen. "Walnut," she repeated softly. "Okay." The desk was made of walnut. We continued our walk, the conversation shifting from logistics to something more real. She asked me about my work, and for the first time, I found myself trying to explain the feeling of it, the satisfaction of a perfect dovetail joint, the way the grain of a piece of wood told a story, the patient, meditative process of shaping something raw and chaotic into something beautiful and useful. I spoke of the honesty of wood, how it couldn't be forced, only understood and guided. In return, I asked her about her grandfather. She spoke of him with a love that was palpable, painting a picture of a man with calloused hands and a brilliant mind, a man who taught her to read blueprints before she could read novels. She described how he would take her to the original machine shop on Saturdays, the air thick with the smell of metal and oil, and how he had told her that integrity was the most important tool a person could ever own. As she spoke, I saw the lines of the CEO soften, replaced by the fond, unguarded expression of a beloved granddaughter. The wall between us was dissolving, not because our script demanded it, but because we were discovering the real people behind the roles we were playing. I was no longer just the carpenter, and she was no longer just the client. We were Liam and Jenna. There were moments, small and fleeting, where the line between fake and real blurred completely. Once, while crossing a busy street, I instinctively put my hand on the small of her back to guide her through the crowd. It was a simple, protective gesture, one I hadn't even thought about. But I felt her stiffen for a fraction of a second before relaxing into the touch. When my hand fell away on the other side of the street, the space between us felt charged, filled with an unspoken awareness. My palm tingled where it had met the soft cashmere of her coat. Another time, we were having dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant, a place I had chosen for its lack of pretension. We were supposed to be rehearsing our story for an upcoming charity gala, the first major event where we would be presented as a couple. But somewhere between the appetizer and the main course, we had fallen into a real conversation about our biggest failures. I told her about the business I had tried to start with a friend after college, a custom cabinetry shop that had failed spectacularly within a year, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a deep-seated fear of risk. She listened without judgment, her chin resting on her hand. Then she told me about her first major project at Sterling, a new software division she had championed. It had been a disaster, costing the company millions and earning her a brutal dressing down from her own father in front of the entire executive team. "He told me I was too impulsive, too emotional," she said, staring down at her plate. "He said I didn't have our grandfather's instincts." It was the cruelest thing he could have said. "He was wrong," I said, the words firm. You took a risk. Sometimes they don't pay off. It doesn't mean you stop trying." She looked up at me, her eyes shining. "David was there. He just smirked. He told me later I should stick to marketing, to the softer side of the business." The mention of his name was like a splash of cold water. It brought us back to the reality of our situation, to the reason we were sitting here in the first place. The easy intimacy of the moment fractured, replaced by the old tension. We were a team, but our team had been formed for the sole purpose of fighting him. He was the gravity that held our strange little orbit together. "We have to be ready for him at the gala," she said, her voice once again cool and strategic. "He will try to corner us. He will ask pointed questions. He'll try to expose us." "Let him try," I said, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "We know our story." But as I looked at her across the table, at the way she was carefully rebuilding her polished facade, I realized our story was becoming more complicated than a walnut desk and a shared love for our grandfathers. There were real feelings getting tangled up in the lies. My feelings. I was starting to care about this woman, about her fight, about the person she was when she wasn't wearing her armor. And that was a danger the contract had never accounted for. The night of the gala arrived like a looming verdict. I stood in front of the mirror in my small bedroom, tugging at the collar of the tuxedo Jenna had insisted on buying for me. The fabric was so fine it felt weightless, but the suit itself felt like a costume, a lie I was wearing on my skin. I looked like myself, but a polished, unfamiliar version. A carpenter in a prince's clothes. The feeling of being an imposter was a heavy weight in my gut. Jenna was waiting for me in the hired car downstairs. When I opened the door, she took my breath away. She was wearing a deep emerald green dress that shimmered under the streetlights. It left her shoulders bare, and a simple diamond necklace rested against her collarbone. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her face. She looked regal, beautiful, and utterly terrifying. "You look," I started, but the words caught in my throat. "Presentable," she offered, a small, nervous smile playing on her lips. She seemed as on edge as I was. "Stunning," I finally managed to say. "You look stunning, Jenna." The use of her name, the genuine compliment, seemed to steady her. "You look very handsome yourself, Liam." Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, we weren't a CEO and her hired fiancé. We were just two people, braced for a difficult night, finding a small island of reassurance in each other. She held out her hand, and I took it. Her fingers were cool and delicate in my large, calloused palm. It was the first time we had held hands. It felt both completely fake and shockingly real. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and glittering jewels. The air hummed with forced laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes. It was David's world, not mine. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on us as we entered, a wave of whispers following in our wake. I kept my expression neutral, my hand resting possessively on the small of Jenna's back, just as we had rehearsed. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. We made our way through the crowd, Jenna greeting people with a calm, practiced grace. She introduced me simply as, "My fiancé, Liam." The reactions were a mixture of shock, curiosity, and poorly concealed appraisal. I could feel them sizing me up, trying to fit me into a box they could understand. The carpenter. The nobody. The man who had somehow landed Genevieve Sterling. It wasn't long before we saw him. David was holding court near the bar, a smug, self-satisfied smirk plastered on his face. He was handsome in that slick, predatory way of his suit perfect, his charm weaponized. When he saw us, his eyes narrowed, and he excused himself from his circle, making a direct line for us. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with false bonhomie. "Jenna, you're looking radiant. And you must be the new project." His eyes raked over me, a dismissive, condescending glance from head to toe. "Still playing with wood, brother? Or have you finally decided to join the real world?" I felt Jenna tense beside me. I kept my hand steady on her back, a silent signal of support. "David," I said, my voice even. "Good to see you too." "I must say I'm surprised," he continued, ignoring me and focusing on Jenna. "After our history, I thought you'd have better taste. A common laborer? It seems a bit desperate, even for you." The insult was designed to humiliate both of us, to drive a wedge between us by highlighting our class differences. I could feel the eyes of those around us, listening in, waiting for the drama to unfold. My first instinct was to lash out, to land a punch on that smug face, an urge I'd been suppressing since childhood. But I knew that was what he wanted. He wanted me to be the brute he painted me as. Instead, I met his gaze, my own calm and unwavering. I didn't defend myself. I defended her. "Jenna has the best taste of anyone I know," I said, my voice low but carrying in the small circle of silence that had formed around us. I turned my head to look at her, my expression softening. "She values things that are real, things that are built to last, not things that are hollow and fall apart under pressure." The double meaning was unmistakable. I wasn't just talking about furniture. I then looked back at David, a small, pitying smile on my face. "It's a concept you've never quite managed to grasp, has it?" David's smirk faltered. He was prepared for anger, for a shouting match. He was not prepared for quiet, unshakable confidence. He was not prepared for me to turn his own insult back on him so effortlessly. He looked from me to Jenna, searching for a crack in our united front. Jenna, seeming to draw strength from my defense, leaned into me slightly. She looked up at me with an expression of such adoration and love that for a second I almost believed it was real myself. It was a masterful performance, but I saw the flicker of genuine gratitude in her eyes. "Liam is the most honest man I've ever met," she said, her voice clear and proud for all to hear. "He reminds me of my grandfather. I'm the luckiest woman in the world." She then turned her cool gaze on David. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have friends to greet. It was so illuminating to see you, David." With that, she took my arm and we walked away, leaving my brother standing there, speechless and fuming. We didn't look back. As we moved through the crowd, a low buzz of conversation followed us. We had won the first round. We didn't speak about it for the rest of the night. We played our parts, smiling, laughing, my hand always touching hers. But beneath the surface, a new current was flowing between us. We had faced the enemy together. We had protected each other. The line between the performance and reality had not just blurred, it had been irrevocably breached. When we finally got back into the car at the end of the night, the silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving a strange sense of intimacy in its place. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper in the dark interior of the car. She was looking out the window, but I knew she was speaking to me. "For what?" "For what you said. For defending me." She turned to face me, her eyes luminous in the passing city lights. "No one has ever done that before." "He had no right to talk to you that way," I said, my voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "To talk about us that way." She reached out and, for the first time, initiated contact. Her fingers gently touched the back of my hand where it rested on the seat between us. The touch was electric, a jolt that went straight to my chest. It wasn't part of the act. It was real. "What you said about me," she began, her voice hesitant, "about valuing things that are real. Did you mean it?" I looked at her, at this incredible, strong, vulnerable woman sitting next to me. I thought of our conversations, of her love for her grandfather, of her fierce determination to protect his legacy. I thought of the way she looked curled up in my grandfather's old armchair. "Every word," I said. Her thumb stroked the back of my hand, a slow, deliberate movement. The car pulled up to her apartment building, a sleek tower of glass and steel. The performance was over for the night, but as the driver opened her door, she hesitated, her eyes locked on mine. There was a question in them, one that had nothing to do with our contract. It was a question I was too afraid to answer, and too hopeful not to. She got out of the car without another word, but the feeling of her touch lingered on my skin long after she was gone. I went home to my empty apartment, the ridiculously expensive tuxedo feeling more like my own skin than it had before. The imposter was starting to believe his own lie, and that, I knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. The aftermath of the gala left an unspoken tension hanging between us. The public victory had forged a private bond that our contract couldn't define. We had acted as a team, and the feeling of it had been too real to ignore, but we didn't talk about it. Instead, we retreated back into the safety of our arrangement, meeting for our scheduled dates, the air between us thick with things unsaid. The call came late on a Tuesday night. I was in the workshop, trying to lose myself in the familiar scent of cedar as I worked on a new commission. The ringing of my phone was a jarring intrusion. It was her. "Liam?" Her voice was thin, frayed at the edges. I could hear the sound of wind in the background. "Jenna, are you okay? Where are you?" I can't be in my apartment," she said, her words rushed. "He was there. David. He talked his way past security. He was waiting for me inside." A cold fury washed over me. "Is he still there? Did he hurt you?" "No, I'm fine. I left. He was just talking, saying horrible things. About the gala, about you, about my father. He knows how to get under my skin." I could hear a tremor in her voice she was trying desperately to control. I needed to get out. Is it okay if I come to the workshop?" "I'm on my way," I said, already shrugging off my work apron and grabbing my keys. "Don't go anywhere. I'll come get you." "No," she insisted. "I'm already in a cab. I just need a safe place. I'll be there in 10 minutes. She arrived looking like a ghost. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and haunted. She had thrown a coat on over what looked like silk pajamas, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. The powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a woman who looked like she was about to shatter. I opened the workshop door and ushered her inside, locking it firmly behind her. The space, which had seemed so shabby to me when she first visited, now felt like the sanctuary she had called it. I led her to the old, overstuffed sofa I kept in my small office area and gently pushed her down to sit. Her whole body was trembling. I didn't ask what David had said. I knew his brand of psychological warfare. Instead, I put the kettle on the small hot plate I kept for tea and coffee. The simple domestic act felt like an anchor in the storm of her distress. I brought her a mug of peppermint tea, wrapping her cold hands around it. She stared into the steam, her breathing ragged. "He said I was pathetic," she whispered, the words raw and painful. "That I had to hire a common carpenter to pretend to love me because no one ever could for real. He said my grandfather would be ashamed of me, using tricks and lies to hold on to a position I didn't earn." "He's wrong," I said, my voice a low growl. I knelt in front of her, forcing her to look at me. He is a poison, Jenna, and he's trying to infect you with it. Don't let him. You are the furthest thing from pathetic I have ever known. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. But he's right about one thing, she said, her voice breaking. This is a lie. I am using you. I'm paying you to be here, to say these nice things to me. How is that any different from what he does? How am I any better? This was her deepest fear, the one she had probably been wrestling with since she first walked into my workshop. That in fighting a monster, she had become one herself. And this, I realized, was the moment of truth. Not for our contract, but for us. The money, the deal, the pretense, it all fell away, leaving only the raw, undeniable connection that had been growing between us. Look at me, I said softly, my hands coming up to cup her face, my thumbs gently wiping away her tears. Do you think I would be here right now for money? Do you think money is what made me defend you at that gala? Do you think money has anything to do with the way my heart beats faster whenever you walk into a room? The confession hung in the air, as real and solid as the workbench behind me. It was a truth I hadn't even fully admitted to myself until the words were out. But they were true. Every single one. Her eyes searched mine, wide with a mixture of shock and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Liam, I'm falling in love with you, Jenna, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. And it has nothing to do with a contract. It has to do with your strength and your loyalty and the way you talk about your grandfather. It has to do with the woman I see when all the armor is gone. That's who I'm falling for. I laid my own fear bare for her to see. My fear, I continued, my voice thick with emotion, is that I'm not enough. That when this is all over, you'll go back to your world of glass towers and board meetings, and I'll go back to my sawdust and my solitude. That a man like me could never really fit into the life of a woman like you. That's what I'm afraid of, not you. Her hands came up to cover mine, pressing my palms against her cheeks. She was looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a dawning realization. You see me, she whispered, a sense of wonder in her voice. You really see me. Not the CEO, not the sterling name, just me. It's all I've ever seen, I said. And then she leaned in. The space between us disappeared. Her lips met mine, tentative at first, then with a deep, aching need that mirrored my own. It was not a rehearsed kiss for the cameras. It was a desperate, honest collision of two people who had found an unexpected truth in the middle of a lie. It was a kiss that tasted of peppermint tea and salt and the scent of cedar that clung to my clothes. It was the first real thing. In that kiss, the contract burned away to ash. The roles we were playing, the CEO, the carpenter, dissolved, leaving only Liam and Jenna. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close, and she melted against me, her hands tangling in my hair. The trembling had stopped. She felt solid in my arms, like she was finally home. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We rested our foreheads together, the world shrinking to the small, safe space of my workshop. I'm not going back to my apartment tonight, she said, her voice firm, resolute. Okay, I said. You can stay here. She shook her head. Not here, with you, at your apartment. If you... Yes, I said, without a moment's hesitation. Yes. There was no more fear, no more doubt. We had found our truth. The deal was over, and something real, something terrifying and beautiful, was just beginning. The final board meeting was scheduled for a Friday. The air in the city that week felt heavy with anticipation. Our relationship, once a secret weapon, was now the talk of the town thanks to the gala. But it was also the primary target. David, we knew, would make his final stand, and he would aim it directly at the heart of what he believed was our lie. The night before the meeting, Jenna and I were at my apartment. She had been staying with me ever since that night in the workshop. Her things were starting to mingle with mine. A silk blouse draped over my armchair, a bottle of expensive face cream next to my bar of soap in the bathroom. My small space was starting to feel like a shared home. She was pacing the living room, a sheaf of papers in her hand, her brow furrowed with worry. "His motion is to declare me unfit to lead, pending a psychological evaluation," she said, her voice tight. "He's going to paint our relationship as a symptom of my instability, a reckless, impulsive decision." I went to her, taking the papers from her hand and setting them on the coffee table. I took her hands in mine. They were cold. "We are not a symptom," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "We are the cure. He can't understand it because he's never felt anything real in his life. All he has are lies and tactics. We have the truth." "But they won't see that," she argued, her voice full of doubt. "They'll see a CEO and a carpenter." "They'll see what he wants them to see." "No," I said, pulling her closer. "They will see a woman who is strong, confident, and supported. They will see a man who loves her and is proud to stand by her side. We just have to walk in there and own it. No apologies, no explanations. Just us." She leaned her head against my chest, and I wrapped my arms around her. I could feel the frantic beating of her heart. "I'm scared, Liam." "I know," I whispered into her hair. "Me too. But we'll do it together." The boardroom at Sterling Industries was an intimidating space. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the board members. The air was cold and sterile. David was already there, sitting opposite the CEO's chair, looking confident and predatory. When we walked in, all eyes turned to us. I felt a familiar surge of inadequacy, the feeling that I was an intruder in this world of immense wealth and power. Then I felt Jenna squeeze my hand. I looked at her. She was wearing a sharp navy blue dress, her expression calm and composed. She was back in her armor, but this time I knew the woman underneath. I squeezed her hand back, a silent promise. I was with her. She took her seat at the head of the table. I took the chair directly behind her, a position of silent support, not of power. The message was clear. I was here for her, not for a seat at the table. David began the proceedings, his voice smooth and reasonable as he laid out his case. He spoke of erratic decisions, of a lack of focus, culminating in her sudden and professionally inadvisable entanglement with me. He presented our relationship as the final, damning piece of evidence of her compromised judgment. "With all due respect," David said, his eyes gleaming with malice, "this is not the behavior of a stable leader. It's a desperate cry for attention." The board members murmured, their faces a mixture of concern and skepticism. I could see them wavering. David's poison was working. Then Jenna spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it commanded the attention of the entire room. "You are right about one thing, David," she began, her eyes fixed on him. "My relationship with Liam was a sudden development. It was unexpected." She paused, then turned her gaze to the rest of the board. For the past 2 years, since my father stepped down, I have dedicated every waking moment to this company. I have sacrificed my personal life, my peace of mind to ensure its success, to honor my grandfather's legacy. She stood up, her posture radiating a strength that filled the room. David sees my relationship with Liam as a weakness, a distraction. He is wrong. Liam is my greatest strength. He is a man of integrity, of quiet conviction, of profound decency. He reminds me every day of what my grandfather taught me, that the foundation of anything worthwhile, be it a company or a life, must be built on honesty and truth. She looked directly at me then, a small, genuine smile on her lips. My only erratic decision was allowing myself to believe for even a second that I had to do this alone. Finding Liam was not a symptom of instability. It was the moment I finally found my balance. Her words were a masterstroke. She hadn't denied the unusual nature of our relationship. She had reframed it as the very source of her renewed strength and focus. She had turned David's greatest weapon into her shield. "This is all very touching," David sneered. "But it doesn't change the fact that this relationship is a farce, a desperate ploy. I have proof." He slid a file across the table. It contained photographs, grainy, long-lens shots of Jenna entering my workshop on that first day. A picture of the bank transfer to my account. "A payment," David announced triumphantly. $200,000. She didn't fall in love with him. She bought him. The room erupted in shocked whispers. This was the killing blow he had been saving. I saw the color drain from Jenna's face. For a single, terrifying moment, I saw her falter. And that's when I knew I had to speak. I stood up. "You're right," I said. Every head in the room swiveled to look at me. Jenna stared at me in horror. "There was a payment," I continued, my voice steady, my eyes locked on David. "There was an agreement. Jenna came to me because she needed someone she could trust, someone you couldn't buy or intimidate, to help her protect this company from a man who would see it destroyed for his own selfish gain." I walked around the table until I was standing beside her, my hand resting on her shoulder. She offered me money, yes, and I took it, because I had my own problems, and I am not a proud fool. But our arrangement was never about pretending to be in love. It was about pretending to be a stable couple to protect this company from your vile, opportunistic attacks. I looked around at the board members. But a funny thing happened. While we were pretending, we found something real. I saw the incredible woman behind the CEO title. I saw her courage, her integrity, her passion. And I fell in love with her. The money is irrelevant. I would stand here beside her for free, and I would do it every day for the rest of my life. I turned back to David, my voice dropping to a cold, hard edge. "You can't comprehend that, can you? A feeling that can't be bought. A loyalty that has no price tag. That's why you will never be the man Jenna's grandfather was. And it's why you will never be fit to lead this company." Silence. A deep, profound silence filled the room. David's face was a mask of pure fury, his plan utterly demolished. I had taken his truth and turned it against him, confirming the facts, but destroying his narrative. An old man at the end of the table, one of her father's oldest friends, cleared his throat. He looked at Jenna, and then at me, and he smiled. "Well," he said, "that's the most passionate defense of a corporate strategy I've ever heard." He looked at David, his smile vanishing. "The motion is denied, and I think it's time we reviewed your own position on this board, young man." It was over. We had won. That evening, we stood on the balcony of her penthouse apartment. The city sprawled out beneath us, a glittering tapestry of lights. The contract was officially fulfilled. The threat was neutralized. The initial premise of our relationship was gone. "So," I said, breaking the comfortable silence, "the deal is over." She turned to me, her expression unreadable in the twilight. "Yes, it is." A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. This was it, the moment where she could thank me for my service and send me back to my world, the check cashed and the job done. "The money is already in an escrow account to buy your workshop," she said, her voice soft. "The deal is honored." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Thank you." She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. She reached up and placed a hand on my chest, right over my heart. "The contract is over, Liam. But what about us?" I looked down into her eyes, the beautiful winter sky eyes that were no longer guarded or cold, but filled with a deep, open affection. All my insecurities, all my fears of not being enough, melted away under that gaze. "Us," I said, my voice thick with emotion as I covered her hand with my own, "is just getting started." I leaned down and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss filled with the promise of a future that was no longer pretend. It was a kiss of new beginnings, of a truth found in the most unlikely of places. It was the start of our real story. Looking back, it's funny how the most terrifying moment of my life was also the most liberating. That day she walked into my workshop, a queen entering a commoner's hovel. I thought she was offering me a simple transaction: money for my time, a lie for my freedom. I thought it was a story about her saving my business, but it turned out to be a story about us saving each other. She showed me I was more than just a carpenter, more than just David's forgotten brother. And I, somehow, showed her she was more than just a CEO. She was just Jenna. My Jenna. Our story didn't start with a glance across a crowded room, but with a bizarre, desperate business proposition. And it turned out to be the best deal I ever made. This was our new chapter, the start of something real, built not on lies or contracts, but on a foundation of honesty and trust. It was built, I suppose, on good bones, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that it was built to last.